Hello and welcome to the BikeRadar News Podcast. I'm Jack Luke and today I'm joined by the formidable Ashley Quinlan. Our regular co-host Simon Von Bromley is otherwise occupied today, so Ashley will be taking his place. And sorry to distress the sensitive viewers among you, but we will also be mixing up today's format, leading instead today with last week's top story on BikeRadar.com as chosen by you, our wonderful readers. And that is the news that Vitus and Nukeproof are making a significant comeback after being sold to the Frasers Group last year in the case of Vitus, and for Nukeproof to the Belgian cycling factory who own Ridley. We're going to bring you some really good analysis on that one from Warren Roster, including quotes from key people at both brands. We're then going to move on to the news that Colnago has kind of out of nowhere launched a track bike of all things, which it describes as the fastest bike in the Colnago range. More on that very soon. Finally, from news this week, we're going to go on to the news that Look has launched some very cool pedals with integrated lights. On the face of it, not the world's most exciting story, but they come with some very interesting claims about how safe they can make you, and I got some expert opinion from a man who's an expert in this very area. Finally, we'll be going on to our rant of the week. And again, I'm feeling positive today, so I'm going to take a positive spin on this and talk about our experience at the Hill Climb Nationals, which took place last weekend. If you aren't already subscribed to BikeRadar.com, you might have missed that wonderful coverage put together by my wonderful video manager, Felix Smith, and myself. We went to the Hill Climb Nationals in Bank Road and Matlock, brought you the coolest tech and also raw footage from the top 20 competitors in the men's and women's fields. Absolutely worth checking that out. Your likes, your subscribes, all these things help us make this wonderful podcast and tickle that algorithm to help things keep going. We've heard more than enough from me. Ashley, how are you doing this morning?
I'm very well, thanks. Yeah, not too bad at all. It's a lovely, lovely Thursday morning as we record. Nice and crisp outside, autumnal, lovely, ready to get going.
Terrific. Yes, so we're going to start off with the news that, so cast your minds back to early 2024, amongst the sort of tail end of the disaster of overstocking through COVID, Vitus and Nukeproof went down with the good ship Wiggle CRC, kind of out of nowhere, to be honest. There's a really complex story behind it and what actually led to the demise of those brands. But long story short, the IP was bought up by Frasers Group, which is owned by Mike Ashley, and sort of parted out a little bit from there, with Vitus and DHB, two of the house brands of Wiggle CRC, staying with the Frasers Group, and Nukeproof, the more like off-roady focused brand, being subsequently sold to Belgian cycling factory. Things were quite quiet there for some time, but if you listen to the news podcast regularly, you will know that Vitus, again, sort of under the radar, launched a couple of new hardtails earlier on this year to little fanfare, which got us thinking about like what is really next for these brands, what do they intend to do next for the brands. So Warren Roster went off and spoke to both brands, and in the case of Vitus, had some really interesting insight as to how they got here. Ash, over to you. Read from my very thorough notes and explain what's what's happened with Vitus.
So yeah, Vitus essentially has been bought up by Mike Ashley's Frasers Group, and this means that essentially it's back in business. It's not at full strength yet, as you might recognise it from previous. These things never are, that simple. But essentially, what's happened is that the Frasers Group, which owns Evans Cycles in the UK, as its main sort of outlet for bike sales,
and pretty much every other major retail outlet in the UK, even outside of cycling. But that's besides the point.
That is besides the point, yes, but it's true nonetheless. They've essentially bought Vitus as more of a premium brand to add to its stable, and that means that it's essentially back in business, which is great news, because Vitus, if you know the history of Vitus, it's got a lot of links with that Sean Kelly, because he used to ride a lot of Vitus bikes through his pro career, and so on. There's a lot of sort of, I think as Warren would say, cachet with Vitus, a lot of history, and so it's nice to see it back.
But from more modern times, really, Vitus has made its name as a brand synonymous with good value. Many of its bikes have won all sorts of awards on BikeRadar, from Bike of the Year to just standalone group tests. They have been a pretty astonishing brand, bringing very, very good value to money with very nice bikes to market. Now, we spoke to John Williams, who's the Senior Commercial Manager for Cycling at the Frasers Group, and he said to Warren that we see Vitus as a key brand for Evans in particular. So throughout the story, he kind of makes clear that this isn't going to just be an online retail, direct-to-consumer only business for Vitus going forward. It will be stocked in Evans stores. But as he said in the story, The challenge the new owners faced was much like the cycling industry in 2025 as a whole, is one of oversupply. And they said that when they looked into what they kind of inherited, I suppose, with Vitus, they found a lot of the stock that had been ordered by the previous partners was still sort of sat there. They subsequently bought that up. In some cases, they've updated the specs, as in the builds, to better reflect kind of modern trends. But the frame sets, they're largely selling through that old stock. But as Warren does point out very fairly in the story, the likes of Vitus's top-end road bikes were hardly screaming out for an update. They were quite trend-setting in a way, or certainly ahead of the curve. So things are going to continue a little bit as they were for Vitus, but they made clear that there are new models in the works. But in the meantime, that does mean there are some great value bargains to be had.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, stocks quite clearly won't last forever in this case, because they're selling through that old stock. I know that they're working behind the scenes to get the engine of manufacture going again. So they'll start building new bikes. I think there's a design team as well that they're sort of reassembling in order to develop the bikes that they've got, the platforms they've got, and so on. And in order to complement, the brands that Evans already sells as well. So, positioning it as that for Evans, a premium brand. Sure, it's not in the same sort of stable as the likes of Colnago or Cervelo and so on, but it's still got that kind of mid-range, few £1,000 kind of price bracket that eventually we'll get back to. So exciting times over there.
Definitely. Final point on this: we should, of course, it's only fair given it's the Mike Ashley Group, point out that they've already done some rather dodgy pricing tactics, and when those two new Vitus hardtails launched, they were already discounted. Now, that aside, we'll leave that judgment to the ASA, but Williams did say in our interview with him that buying up the existing inventory enabled us to discount the bikes heavily, even though they are completely new bikes, some are even unreleased.
So there you go.
I will leave that with you for those who are familiar with how the Fraser Group likes to price things. Anyway, on to Nukeproof. So Nukeproof is actually a really old brand. You know me, Ash. I like eBay.
You do?
I like spending time on eBay. I was quite stunned the other day because I was looking for a new rear hub for our tandem. And did you know that in the mid-90s, Nukeproof made a bonded carbon alloy 140mm spaced Ari threaded tandem hub? The most niche product imaginable. There you go. Anyway.
I just want to make it clear that it's not our tandem. This is you and your
Oh, sorry,
tandem.
yes, I should say yes. It's not our tandem, but it is a community asset. Anyone on BikeRadar is welcome to borrow it. Though no one's taking me up on the offer.
I might try one day, you never know.
Anyway, Nukeproof was bought by the Belgian bike factory, who, among many other brands, own Ridley, but Ridley's their sort of flagship brand, if you want to say. Now, Ridley has had mountain bikes in its range, and still does. It has quite a nice full suspension cross-country mountain bike, but Ridley is going to remain fully focused on gravel now, with Nukeproof, I suppose, taking the mountain bike mantle. I think we've sort of seen teases of what might come from Nukeproof, but they're a little less further down the tracks compared to Vitus. We spoke to some people behind the brand, and the CEO of Belgian cycling factory Joachim Ertz said at the time when the acquisition was announced that he wanted to keep Nukeproof UK-based and retain the thinking behind the brand and design with the same focus. It now has the backing and production abilities of Belgian cycling factory, and speaking to them, it looks like they're going to move more into cross-country bikes in the short term. We've already seen teasers of downhill bikes, and I've no doubt the likes of like the Megawatt, their super successful e-enduro bike, will also be brought back. It's going to be quite a different position, I think, for Nukeproof now, given the backing of Belgian cycling factory. That is a really significant body, I suppose, if you like, within cycling. Now, one thing that will not be continued, though, is Nukeproof's gravel bikes. Now, Warren made note of this as a fan of the sort of shreddier end of the gravel bike spectrum. There's a bit of a loss for the cycling world. But what do you think, Ash?
I don't know. I think the Digger RS, I think, is the one that Warren is specifically refers to, and he's right in that is a slightly different gravel bike. It's very gnarly, very aggressive. It almost errs on the side of mountain biking, which you'd expect from a brand like Nukeproof. I'm not. I think it's actually in context that we're seeing, in gravel bikes, tires getting wider. Bikes also having a lot more clearance for said tyres. I think it's possibly a shame that such a bike isn't in the market, because I think it's actually of its time right now. It was certainly progressive a couple of years ago when I think I first heard about it. So yeah, it's a shame from that point of view. But we do have plenty of bikes in the gravel space. I don't think it's for me. I don't. We new gravel bike launches every other week at the moment, and I think I think we're well stocked at the moment. And you never know, Nukeproof might decide to go down that route again. I mean, I was more interested to hear that they were going down sort of considering going down the cross-country route, which is not something I've ever associated with Nukeproof before.
No, and fairly, yes, they've been much more of a gravity-focused brand, I'm sure the shredders would say among you. So yeah, quite an interesting note, but they said that the kind of like racing focus and the racing heritage of the brand is quite important. The new guy who's behind there, a guy called Clive Gosling, who was at Cannondale for many years, he's quite closely linked with the racing scene, and when I spoke to him, emphasised that getting Nukeproof back to its racing heritage is quite important to him, and it's safe to say that cross-country racing is really cool now. So to see them move into that space would be no surprise. Something I'd like to test. Thank you very much. Now, one final thing we shouldn't overlook is the likes of DHB and Prime, which are another two house brands within the Wiggle CRC group. DHB produced phenomenally good value cycling kit, and Prime, though less of a talked about brand, produced really fantastic wheels and finishing kit, some of which was exceptionally light and very cheap. From what I understand, Prime is going to pretty much sell through what they have, but as a sort of like aftermarket offering, it's not going to be a focus of the Frasers Group. They're going to kind of retain that one as in-house finishing kit for their complete bikes, and they will still offer the odd bits aftermarket, but there's not going to be tons in the way of aftermarket stuff going to you, our wonderful readers and consumers. DHB, though, is really continuing pretty much as is. They said that the existing stock was acquired from the suppliers at the time they were purchased, which enables us to continue supply while new products were being finalised. But an interesting, I suppose, quirk, if you like, of the cycling kit market, but I'm sure this is true of other outdoor industries too, is that the sort of development of new products, while designers at brands will have influence on cuts and overall designs, is actually really led more by the kit manufacturers themselves and subsequently the fabric manufacturers. So they are working on new designs for the road and gravel side, but they're kind of going to drop out of the triathlon market from what we gather. Ash, you've tested many products over the years, including lots of kit. Would you welcome return of DHB back to the cycling world?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it. I think for me, I see it a lot more on sort of local club riders. It's a popular brand, and rightly so, because the quality is very good for the money you're spending. And we've actually got a bib short on test at the moment, or at least
from DHB.
From DHB, exactly. Yeah, we might when they started selling them again. We thought, right, let's get one in and let's measure it against what is out there at the moment. So you look forward to reading that at some point. To be confirmed on when we publish that, but soon, I hope.
Bang in season, bib shorts.
Bib shorts, of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course they are. Yes, but we're going to look at bib tights again later this season as well. So we'll have a look at DHB again because we know it's universally popular and rightly so.
Intriguing. I'm looking right now live at the DHB recent products posted on Evan Cycles. Again, their brand new extreme winter gloves are already with 50% off at £35. Frasers Group at it again. Anyway, but yeah, some really nice looking kit. Kind of same, quite classic lines, very pared back. DHB kit's good. Yeah,
I should say as well that there's no indication at the moment that the quality has dropped in any way relative to where it used to be. From the early signs that we've seen from the bib shorts that we've just tested, but and other products that I have got my hands on just recently. There's no indication that as I say, the quality has dropped, which means that even if the prices aren't, might be a little bit lower than you're expecting, don't think that also equates to a drop in quality at this stage.
Quite. On to our next item. This one kind of struck us out of the blue. Colnago is launching a track bike, the TR1. Now, Colnago hasn't been involved in the track space for quite some years, and this new bike is bang up to date with a very, very modern silhouette, which, if you're familiar with Colnago's bikes, looks very, very similar to the Y1 RS aero bike ridden by Tadej Pogačar, but more importantly, ridden by Ashley Quinlan for our Bike of the Year test. Anyway.
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, you're quite right.
Yes. Anyway, onto the track bike. It's quite similar to the recent crop of new track bikes that we've seen on the market, in that it can be adapted to suit different events. Much like that Velobike New Zealand track bike that was launched earlier this month, you can swap out the front end to sprint events, whatever. And Colnago is saying that as a result of its testing and design, all the rest of it, he's the fastest bike in the Colnago range. Now, I will caveat this section very heavily by saying we're going off the press release here. And by the time you listen or watch to this podcast, you will be able to read the full story on BikeRadar.com. We have our man on the ground, Stan Porter, heading to a velodrome today in London to go learn about the bike, where he will bring you more details. But one thing that kind of struck me as interesting is that Colnago hasn't made clear in the press release who this bike is going to be ridden by. So Pinarello are currently the partners for Team Italy and track events and have ridden to very great success. And one would assume, heavy emphasis on assume, that this is being produced ahead of LA 2028 Olympics. It's the sort of crowning event of track events. So it's interesting to see that Colnago hasn't made clear who's going to ride this. Ash, as an observer, I think it's fair to say we are both observers of the track world. We're not regularly found on the boards.
Not on the boards, no, but I do watch it, yes.
Do you think there's value in a brand like Colnago going into the track world from a marketing and presence perspective?
I think so, and I think if Colnago can achieve it without necessarily, you know, they're using. There's a lot of influence in this. They say there's a lot of influence from the original TT1 bike and TT bike, that is, and the Y1 RS. So, you know, they've got some knowledge around what works, what doesn't in the wind tunnel, presumably, and so they're as much as it's not a Franken bike in any way, but they are stitching sort of elements of bikes together here to create it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can work. You know, we're not really talking about a Formula One car here, which has got all little strafes and bits and pieces here. We're, you know, in order to control airflow, it's a lot bigger, a lot more complicated. A bike isn't so complicated, really, albeit there's plenty of nuance. So yes, I do think it's a good thing for the brand to be there. I think it's good for presence in the bike industry. That's all it needs to focus on. It isn't like Colnago is in any other industry. It needs to appeal to a wider market. So having a presence in track and maybe seeing the value that Pinarello might have driven and other brands besides from being on, you know, in the track space, means that it's a good move for the brand. But in terms of like ride, you know, who might ride it, I mean, Colnago is at least partly owned, if not wholly owned, by a conglomerate in the Middle East, I believe. And so it could be that we might see riders from that area, you know, teams from that area sort of to riding that bike.
It's probably actually worth throwing back to last week's news podcast. We discussed a bit around Rafa and their decision to move away from EF as their sponsored pro team and instead partner with USA Cycling as their new clothing partner across all disciplines. Now, I'm sure Rafa and Colnago know a great deal more about marketing than you or I, and one would assume that their move into track cycling is partly similar to Rafa in that clearly they think there's a large enough mainstream audience, but also an engaged audience, that having Colnago bikes raced on the track will make a significant impact for the brand. Or maybe they're just doing it because they really like track racing. That is also entirely possible if you have a benevolent owner with lots of cash splashing around.
Quite possibly, but I think you know this bike has not been produced in isolation, i.e. that Colnago then hopes someone's going to pick it up. There'll be conversations going on with federation, you know, national federations in order to, you know, secure a deal. They'll, you know, those federations will know this bike was coming, and it's possible that a deal has already either been signed or is very close to being signed with one or more national federation. It could be an exclusive deal. It may not be. So there's lots going on. Maybe
everyone will be listening or watching to this going, we already know, because Stan Portis has done such a diligent job reporting on.
Maybe he'll know by this point. Yes.
And of course, it would be remiss of me not at this point to acknowledge the existence of the BikeRadar news inbox. If you have any questions, leads, comments, feedback, whatever you want, send those to podcast@bikeradar.com. I keep a hawkish eye on that inbox. I care about what you have to say. And if there's anything you'd like us to discuss in future episodes, if you have a question for the Tech Q&A, ping it over there. And of course, leave comments if you're watching this over on YouTube. Again, give it a like. It helps the algorithm. Keeps us gainfully employed, Ash. We need that stuff.
We do.
On to our final news piece of the day before we come on to our very positively spun rant of the week is the news that Look has launched a very interesting set of pedals with integrated lights. Now, I will emphasise what I said at the start of this podcast. That in itself is not really that exciting a news story, but it comes with some quite bold claims, and actually, a lot of the audience have been really engaged by this one. Now, the key claim is that the pedals make you 5.5 times more visible and you're supposed to be visible from up to a kilometre away, relying on biomotion, that is to say, something moving and illuminated to increase your conspicuity. Is that how you say it?
Conspicuousness.
Yeah, the conspicuousness to drivers. This is a well understood, I suppose, phenomenon. And I have got some really good quotes in a minute to come back to on that. But Ash, is there any other juicy stats we should know about these pedals?
I don't know about stats specifically. I think that's probably the main one in terms of visibility, and that's really important. At night, we're all want to be safer as cyclists, so I think it is incredibly important that. Well, I say incredibly important. I think it's a really good sort of innovation that Look has brought this to market. It initially had an urban pedal that had lights on it as well.
Yes, they did, didn't they? I forgot about this.
And I think this is kind of a natural sort of step forward, if you like. It's quite nice as well because I think that the body of the body of the Look pedal actually does kind of suit having a light behind it as well. There's a nice little flat section at the back. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a set just to see if they ride any differently to normal Look Keo Blade or Keo 2 Max pedals, which I think are the two variants you can get.
That's correct. €249 for the Look Keo Blade Ceramic Vision, which has a carbon body, ceramic bearings, and a 705mm squared contact surface for optimal performance.
There you go.
Or you can have the Keo 2 Max Vision for €124.90. This has a composite body, steel bearing, and a slightly smaller contact area at 500mm squared.
Yeah, I mean, sure, those are the two versions that they've put to market at this point. I think it would be nice that if this were a little bit cheaper, if I'm honest. I think visibility and safety is for everyone, not just those who can afford, say, at least £124.90 for a set of pedals.
One would assume that somebody, I'm going to do some live research while we do this, but I would assume that there's a set of clip-on lights for pedals that must exist on the market. And if somebody hasn't done that, then they definitely should.
Quick, let's get in the shed and innovate.
Exactly. There was those Enduro overshoes for years that had the little integrated lights on the back of the overshoes.
Yeah, I've seen some shoe covers for road that have got that as well, like a little button light inside that you could have. It's a really good idea. Like, I've tested lots of lights for BikeRadar and before that. And,
we don't speak about that.
We don't speak about that. No, I didn't
past.
exist before I came
Precisely.
to BikeRadar. Exactly.
Yeah. That's outside of BikeRadar canon.
There you go.
Yeah.
But I've tested a lot of lights, and it just adds a layer of peace of mind if you've got that those lights moving around. And I think there's a lot of sense in that. Something that's moving in it's kind of an unnatural way, and pedaling a bike viewed from behind is an unnatural movement. You don't see it very often, so it's going to draw attention to you, regardless of whether you're riding it day or night. And it's a good thing. It can only be a good thing in my view. You're
bang on the money with that. So Mark Green, I spoke to this guy years and years ago. We did an article on the site on flashing versus steady bike lights, establishing which was safer. The answer is it depends, as with so many of these things.
Or both.
But Mark Green, who is an expert in human factors. Now, human factors are the psychological discipline that applies scientific knowledge of human nature, i.e. perception, cognition, and response, to design a better and safer world. He's a very smart guy. And his website's super interesting because he talks about all sorts of things in the built environment, if you like. But one of the key things he talks about is conspicuity aids for cyclists. Now, his overall view is that the research isn't very high quality in this area. He says that they have often examined visibility, not conspicuity and recognizability, which are more important. So rather than how visible it is versus the background, how easily can it be identified, I suppose. He's also said that the research to date has been poorly controlled and found mixed results, except that biological motion, that is something moving on a human, it can increase how visible you are. His view is that things like high-vis vests don't make a significant difference, but his very, very top-line overview of these pedals was that they, on the face of it, do likely seem to be of some help. So I'm gonna speak to this guy a little bit more, and hopefully we're gonna maybe get him on the BikeRadar podcast. Certainly do an article on the site, but I think Luke's claims around this aren't guff. They are actually true.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it would be interesting to know as well whether, the recognizability element. So the human brain presumably sees a stimulus, sees a light. It then recognizes what that light represents. And it's not just a light. Like, your brain then has to process that information and say, okay, and you recognize that that's something you want to avoid. It's a cyclist, it's another car, it's a bus, it's a dog with a flashy collar on, for example. And all of these things, you recognize these things, and then your response to that changes depending on your human factors, right? And your interpretation of that information. So it'd be interesting to see, how much recognizability influences the response of someone. It does having these lights make it like more recognizable that is absolutely a cyclist, and therefore I care more, therefore I'm going to stop, take more care.
I think that I'm really speaking out of turn here. I'd have to go back and reread the article, but I think the key takeaway about biomotion with pedals specifically is that imagine you're looking at pedals from behind with reflectors or lights, and they're moving sort of up and down this really weird, like piston-like motion. There's nothing else in the built environment or natural world that looks like that.
No.
And that is what kind of triggers the response. That's a cyclist. Whereas flashing lights are more, particularly like in a built, busy urban environment, are kind of everywhere and kind of melt into the background. You've all experienced it. If you've been on the road, you just like don't see something that you absolutely should have seen. Whereas building in that unusual motion is what makes these safer. Really cool product. Very, very cool product. We're going to rant. We're going to wrap up this week with a positive rant. And this is off the back of a piece I've written for the site. As I mentioned at the start of the podcast, I'm just back from the Hill Climb Nationals. It is a professional and personal highlight every year. I really like going there, seeing all the wild tech. The crowds are amazing. It's just really good fun. But this year's event in Matlock on Bank Road, hosted by Matlock CC, was quite unlike anything else I've been to in the UK, and really shows how much value hill climb racing can bring to the UK cycling scene. And I dare say, my assessment is it is now the most prestigious prize in the UK road cycling scene. The level, the slickness of the event more than anything else was unheard of, really, for a cycling event in the UK. Like, really thorough race pack sent days in advance. Very, very good live digital timing. There's not like people writing on pen and paper at the top. A very slick social media presence. A giant HQ that was more than big enough, commodious enough for the 460 competitors. A closed road event. It was just, the whole thing was really, really slickly organised. But the venue also made a significant difference. Being in a town centre, like there are few places in the UK which are going to have a horrible enough hill to hold the Nationals, but are also going to have like a local council who are willing to let 460 cyclists ride up a hill really fast, be sick everywhere. But it just kind of logistically made things much easier, where there was ample parking. People could actually feasibly travel there by public transport if they so wished. But one of the key differences for me was it didn't start at the crack of dawn. I think the first rider was off at 11:15 in the morning. Now, there are arguments either way. If you have it earlier, people can get on with their lives. But this is a Nationals level event, and by its very nature will bring people from across the country. And I spoke to one chap from Stirling, and he drove down there that morning. A very early start, but very feasible to actually do it in a day, which from an accessibility perspective, I guess not everyone can have a full weekend off to go ride for 2.5 minutes up a hill.
No.
And also the cost of staying overnight, all these various things. Keeping it a little bit later in the day, I think, is a really good thing for the sport as a whole. Not appropriate for every event, but it's definitely appropriate for the Nationals, and quite a marked difference from previous ones I've been to. And I got a lie-in, which was nice. But the thing for me was just, like, the depth and the quality of the field is better than it has ever been before. 460 competitors, at the pointy end of the men's and women's races, like, the racing was really serious. Harry Hudson, a world champion, the current boys junior world champion, raced and did a time that would have been good enough to put him in 5th place in the men's senior event. But the quality and the depth of the crowd, it was like being in the Alps. Like, I'm not exaggerating. From the first moment of the first rider, there was a decent crowd around the sort of heart of the course. But by the end, I would say it was like 4 or 5 deep easily in the centre part of the course. And there's a fantastic POV video from Harry Mack, the guy who won. You should absolutely watch it. It is stunning watching him go through that sort of parting of the seas of the crowd as he goes up. And to make this about me, in 2018, the one and only nationals I rode was on P-Royd Lane. And I remember coming up into the very last left-hander, and I was like so unbelievably overgeared on the stupid fixie. And I kind of like, as I approached the left-hander before the sprint-ish to the end, I remember hearing like the commentator like call out my name and say, "My God, look at him, he's so overgeared." and like everyone went bananas, and like, this sounds really arrogant, I don't mean it as it sounds, but like BikeRadar was quite of some notoriety that week. We'd done our Hill Climb Nationals, people who knew who we were. Ruben and Joe got much bigger cheers than I did, but for like the one moment in my cycling life, I felt like an actual pro. It was incredible. I still think about it now, like however many years on, and if that's the impact it had on like a sad man in his mid-20s, the juniors who were there, who were timed really well, they weren't right at the start of the day, they were sort of in the last, I'd say 2 hours of the event. You know, like the cute kids going up was amazing, going through this like wonderful crowd full of people, but the actual like, I dare say like quite serious juniors, maybe 14, 15-year-old, like what an incredible experience for them to like actually experience proper racing in the UK in a format which is totally accessible. And I do not think for a moment it's a stretch to say that there could well be the next Harry Hudson amongst those, and they might go to even greater things than, as I said, what I think is the most prestigious race in the UK calendar.
Good rant. I didn't have to say a word.
What can I say?
Yeah,
I actually wrote
great.
the article last night, so it's fresh in the
Fresh
mind.
in your mind. Can I ask you a question though? Do you think that hill climbing is going to, you know, you say it's the biggest that you've seen, the best organised that you've seen in recent years, if ever. Is there a chance that it could spread even wider? It could attract international, you know, riders into the fold. I mean, you know, everyone would love to see Tadej Pogačar have a go at it, but like, okay,
like the rules of it, no. The CTT is like, it is the UK national. It is a nationals level event. So it's only applicable to people who are resident in the UK. Whatever. I don't know exactly what the criteria would be, but I think the format is clearly like, we always do content on it every year. We love it. It's really important to the site. We get comments every year, people being like, "Oh, I wish these were in the States," or "I wish these were wherever." Like, it is, when I think the key draws for it is that it is so accessible. The scene is just nice in the UK. It's very friendly. I've always felt welcomed. That's all very positive. But it's a very easy to understand format. It's a time trial. You got to ride up the hill as fast as you can. When you compare that to sort of the complex rules and traditions of conventional road racing, it's so markedly different. But I also think it'd be disingenuous to suggest that anybody who's into cycling is not at least a little bit interested in tech. Tech is really part of it. It's like being a photographer. Like, you can't be a photographer and not be interested, at least in the craft. And hill climb tech is, again, like so easy to understand. Make it lighter.
yeah,
And it will be faster. Of course, there's other elements which are important, and the super nerdy competitors will optimize within a nanometer of usability, but for the majority of people, it's one of the few places where these quite tangible differences, my bike is lighter, makes a difference. And I think that's a huge part of the draw, where you can do things from the free to the outlandish, and you might get a moment of limelight on BikeRadar.com, which is surely part of the draw as well.
I think it's wonderful as well. Like, well, while you were out there, I was at my local hill climb, just watching my local, you know, just very small hill climb, Welly Wheelers Cycling Club, to name drop them.
Welly Wheelers?
Wellington Wheelers.
Oh, I see.
Wellington Wheelers. And they, I mean, like, it's the same vibe. You know, I think wherever you go, everyone just goes down for a good time, a little bit of competition, but, you know, it really is like a community event. And I think I get the sense from you, I've never been to a Hill Climb Nationals, and I'd love to go, because I get the sense that that's what you get from it, only just on a larger scale than you would from a very local hill climb.
I think, honestly, the only thing I could draw a comparison with was when I went to the World Champs in Leuven in 2023? Yeah, it would have been 2023, I think. I'd have to double check. But like, it's the only Belgian bike race I've been to. It was bonkers. And by the time the like last riders were going off, like, it was wild costumes, booze was flowing. It was all very good natured, the crowd, but it was proper rowdy halfway down the course. I've never seen something like it in the UK.
Yeah.
Even in like, so I was in Glasgow. We were both in Glasgow for the World Champs.
Yep.
Like, it was really amazing, like huge crowd. But it's like a more like a curious onlooker crowd at a World Champs event in a city. This is a really committed enthusiast crowd at the Hill Climb Nationals, and it was just terrific. I loved it. And well done to Matlock CC for organising it. It was such a slick event. Next year it's going to be in Porlock Toll Road. Totally different event.
That sounds like fun. Ridden that sounds like fun.
4 miles long compared to I think the winning time, I double check this, but it's like 12 or 13 minutes. Ed Laverick holds the KOM currently for the men's. And like the winning time was 2 minutes 14 seconds for Bank Road. So totally different affair. I think TT bikes are going to be the choice. It is also a more rural event. I don't think it's going to attract the same kind of level of crowds. And, you know, they do have to mix up venues. Not everything can be a short and sharp sprint in the middle of a town centre.
No.
But I think any club who's hosting the Nationals in the future should look at the Bank Road event this year as the model for how to run a successful Nationals, and really demonstrates how much value it brings to the UK cycling scene.
There you go.
I bloody love it. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Again, questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, podcast@bikeradar.com. Send them through. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment below. Click the bell icon so you get a notification every time we upload a video. And thank you very, very much for listening. We'll speak to you again soon.